Hey everybody, welcome to meeting 12. This week we're going to talk about FTP servers and how to get your stuff published. So, a server is just some place where you can host your website so that people can see it. We'll keep it simple here. But what you may not know is that there are several different types of servers that can show your stuff to the world. One's called shared. There's another thing called dedicated. And there's another one called co-located, which is virtual private network. It might be referred to as VPN. So shared means that your site sits on a server box with dozens or maybe thousands of other websites, depending on your hosting company. The weakness there is when their traffic goes up, it's possible your performance could go down. Dedicated means that you have your own system. You've actually hired someone to keep your website on that box, and you're the only one that has it. And that can be a little bit expensive. It's going to have the best performance, and it should be used for sites that anticipate a little more traffic than other sites. Now, the co-located means that you do sit on the same box, but you have your own partition, meaning that you have your own dedicated amount of server strength, meaning that if someone else had a high traffic, your performance would not go down. So we can get into more on this in other classes, but I can tell you that shared, you can get it for free if you want. There are free hosts out there, and you can but one of the weaknesses with that is they give you the domain being the web address. So the other weakness is that people will know it's shared, and as a professional, you should have a good site on a dedicated. Now, dedicated has the performance, but there's a higher cost. A lot of my clients go with a co-located. Clients who get more traffic, like let's say the Valley View Casino Center, they have what's called a load balancer, so that they'll have servers connected to each other, multiple servers. And one server goes down, the other one picks up the pace. So that's dedicated, but I only use that for them. I have other sites that are pretty well known, but those are on usually co-located or just their own dedication without a load balancer. Alright, so as far as hosting, things you want to look for the highest amount of file storage. This is important because it can build up. If you've seen some of the links I use in my demonstrations, they use a website called mm214.com. I've been teaching that site since 2002. I have literally 17 gigabytes of storage in there. They've given me infinity storage, and that's because I refer students to that hosting company. It's a hosting company called HostRocket. So, file storage is key. I don't care who you are. You want to have assets from clients, things like that. Look for good file storage. The ability to control your own URL is huge. A lot of hosting companies right now allow you they'll actually insert a security certificate for you so that you can have not only an HTTP prefix, but also an HTTPS. And that's huge, especially if you plan on doing e-commerce at any time. Now, there's quite a cluttered market in the shared hosting services market, and look for automatic backups. Look for scanning for hackers, things like that. Those are the services that would prompt you to choose your host. Personally, I believe that you, at this point in your studies, need a host and a domain to start your career. You start your branding. And we cover this in WebDNet 191, the portfolio class. But you should start early. And for me, it's worth it to get that domain going, to spend maybe $5 or $6 a month. My host is, as I said, is HostRocket. They let me host other websites. I only pay like $12 a month for that host. It's not too bad. But I also host other sites there, and I charge those sites that I host usually $100 a month for hosting. So think if you have 10 or 12 sites, you're making $1,000 or $1,200 a month, and you're only paying the 12. That's not too bad, is it? All right, so the thing about domain names and how they relate to hosting is you want a custom URL that says who you are. It brands you. It could be something like chrissecorddeveloper.com or sandiegodeveloper.com. So you want a host that'll allow you to get a custom URL and implement it. Now, they're a dime a dozen. They're all over the place. In the Mesa program alone, most students go with either HostGator, Bluehost, HostRocket, DreamHost, and a few others. The custom URL is going to be huge for you. You'll buy it at someplace like oneandone.com or GoDaddy, or you may even register it with and buy it from the host themselves. You're going to want a static IP address because that IP address is you don't want it to change. That is your address. And if it changes, then the user may not be able to find you again. You always want your IP address to point to the root folder, and your custom URL, for that matter, to point to the root folder as well. As we get, moving forward, this is the first course in this program. You'll see we have a lot of server-side coding classes. Those are when we can really focus on this stuff. But the root folder is generally a folder called public_HTML, or maybe HTTP, or maybe home. It really depends on the host, but that root folder is one folder in many on your website. And you'll know which one it is, but you want your domain name and IP address to point to that root folder. Alright, so these are the hosting platforms. Almost all of the public ones right now are Unix, Linux. You can get Windows servers. If you want to do that, Liquid Web has been great for me. Liquid Web did a really good job for a few other clients that I've had who had Windows dependent work on them. But I would go with the modern Unix Linux model. And they have a software usually installed called Apache that runs the server. And Apache is a really cool thing. You can do a lot of fun things with it. You can password protect. You can make your own file extension, which is really cool. I mean, that's a big deal. So most of the ones that hosting companies I mentioned in the last slide, like your HostMonster, HostGator, all those, they run Unix, Linux. Alright, so as far as file storage, when you get your server, there will be a root directory, there will be folders. You're going to make folders that are exactly like the website you've been working on locally. You can use relative paths, which means you just do, let's say it's an image source tag, you do it without the entire URL, but you just have to make sure when you upload to your server that you maintain the same pathways that that website already had when it worked locally. Now, websites generally have a default file that has its own file name, and it's usually any of these 8. So if I were to upload an index.html to mm214.com, I would type in mm214.com and it would automatically load index.html. That is the default file for my server. You're likely to see any of these other file extensions. Let me take you on a quick ride, just so I can show you what I'm talking about here. I'm going to open up an FTP client real quick and show you what I mean. Excuse me. Now you see the ASPX here. That would demand a Windows server. That's a language called .NET, and here's PHP, which can be loaded in both Windows and Linux servers. Okay, so hopefully, let me go back. Actually, this refers to this. This file transfer program is what you're looking at right in front of you. This is FTP. This is FileZilla. You see all my sites here? I'm going to go ahead and load in the one that I use the most, which is mm214.com. So when I do this, it's making a connection. And basically to do this, you have to have your host, your username and password. So I'm going to cancel that out, and it's retrieving a directory listing. There we go. So this is above the root level. And there's all sorts of files and folders. But the root level is actually this. public_HTML, which I mentioned a few slides ago. So I'm going to open this up, and we're going to go right to my index page. So remember how I told you that the index would be your home page? Well, here you see index.php, and that's because my server runs a lot of PHP. So what I can do is edit it, which I'm going to do. You see the status up here as I'm downloading, and that's just to install FileZilla. But this is my stuff, and I can go ahead and do something like WebD162. Oops. Save it. And when I save it, FileZilla will ask me if I can re-upload, so I will. And just to prove to you that that is my, there we go. There we go, right here. Here's mm214.com, and there's hi WebD162. See it parsed first. So that's what I mean by FTP and index files. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that and resave it, re-upload it. And now when I get up here, I can just hit refresh, and hopefully it's gone. Come on, let's load. There we go, it's gone. So that is FTP. I use FileZilla. There's a great program called CyberDuck as well. Those are probably the two industry standards. The other thing you should know is most servers come with a control panel, and the hosting companies I mentioned recently all have them. In fact, my own. We'll go to cPanel here. See, I wrote to another class here to push my nav over. It's funny. But I just logged into cPanel here. And what this can do is actually allow you to edit the site from an interface. So here's my cPanel. And I can go ahead and log in. Now, a lot of servers, almost every server will have this. Some will have something called Plusk. Both are great. They're just graphical user interfaces, dashboards, if you will, to control your server. So I can control my file manager here and literally do the same thing that I just did with FTP. So here's the same files. And it's really, really a great thing. In fact, my server comes with all sorts of fun stuff, like Softaculous, which allows me to install anything I want. It's got backups, it's got disk usage here, directory privacy, it's got a lot of great things. So again, I pay about $12-13 a month for this, but part of that is because I want unlimited space. It's very common to get something the same amount with HostRocket for $5 or $6 a month. Definitely worth it. Alright, so here's third-party FTP programs. I just showed you FileZilla and mentioned CyberDuck. SmartFT is a pretty good one too. And basically what happens is here's your server box with all your files for your website. And you FTP up, and then the server serves the web page to the PC. So what happens with FTP is it establishes a communication channel via port. Well, let's go back to that again. In this case, when I go to my site manager, you will see that there's no port here. I would either be calling, if it's FTP, I'd be 21. If it's SFTP, it would be port 22. But FileZilla makes that decision for you, which is really nice. But these are all things you'll be learning. Active FTP is the client determines which server port to use, which may be blocked by a firewall. So I can skip around this, but honestly, modern day clients all take care of this for you. And passive FTP is what I just said, where it chooses port 21. So here's a couple of free hosting accounts that you guys can use for this class. Whoops. One is 000 web host, and I actually have 000 web host. And these guys are great. They allow you to, for free, just upload your files. So I can go ahead and log in. I've got free accounts with all these places just for kicks, just to do demonstrations. So here I go. I'm going to go ahead and log in. And basically the way this works is they will give you FTP. I'm only going to do one of these. Come on, load. So slow, so slow. So if I go to manage website right here, here I am. Basically this is my website, and my settings, I can actually get my FTP information right here. Here's my FTP. Host name, port, username, and my password. So when I go into FileZilla, All I have to do is go to my site manager, fill out my information here, click connected, and we're good. It's at first it's daunting, but it can take a while. And these are two excellent free hosts. Both of them, I've got plenty of student submissions that are fine. This is a list of validators, which we've been over. I've been using this one to correct your work. You probably know that. But the beauty about having a server is that when you go into these validators, like this little guy, the HTML5 validator, I'll show you something real quick here. I know I keep going back, right? Here's this one. But the fact is I can easily put my, when you go here, when you guys submit, what I do to check this, and a few of you have seen screencasts on this, what I do is I'll go and just put the text input in there. Just paste the web page in. But if it's on your server, you can point it to the address, the URL, which is a really nice convenience. So let's go forward here. I've got my silly little Screen-O-Matic here, missing part of the stuff. But as we get ready for your final project in this course, let me reiterate that overall design is related to the site's purpose. Never, ever use design as a disruption from content delivery. It's been a constant message I've been doing all course. Also, I want you to consider the target audience of sites like this, NASA, things like that. Go to the Bureau of Labor, see who your audience is for your site, whatever it is, and just make sure that it works. Okay, also when you're getting your site together, the final project, just make sure there's a clearly defined homepage, make sure you have nice information architecture and a hierarchical organization for that architecture. If you look here, it's a perfect example. You get your homepage, maybe 3 subpages. In this case, it's an e-commerce site. You may have a couple categories that you like from your products that you want to link to from that nav, but the navigation really defines your hierarchy. So, as I go through this, when we look at this stuff, designed to provide for accessibility, and I know this is a very complicated thing. I just want to start early and get these concepts in your head. Specifically the bottom, Section 508, you should know what that is. It can get you work. If your portfolio piece has things that follow these requirements, it says a lot about you. And you can even put a little icon at the bottom of the page that says, you know, WCAG 2.01 compliant. In WebD 191, I get into these in depth. That's that portfolio class. But WCAG 2.10 is a huge thing. It stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and they're very easy to follow. They're almost common sense, but in this course, I would say just have very clean code and think about anyone who has a disability or a slow internet connection or a crappy computer, or as a matter of fact, the bulk of your audience, which is the mobile user. Now, as far as your content, always avoid long blocks of text. We all know it. No one really reads online. And if they do, they don't do it for long because they get exhausted. That's been proven by numerous studies, that reading something digitally will exhaust you faster than reading off a page. Feel free to use as many bullet points and headings and subheadings as you want. I don't care. The more I see headings, the more I'm going to like your work. Use very short paragraphs because I guarantee you there's so much documentation out here. No one reads anymore. So, use easy-to-read text. A lot of you have seen me use CSS font stack. Let me go to that real quick so I can show you. If you haven't seen it, I may have done it already in a screencast, but if you haven't seen it, these are your friends. CSS font stack. It should load here. I'm sorry it takes so long to load here. But this tells you the platforms and what percentage of platforms take each font. Now you can always embed the font. You can use Google Font. You could, call on the internet to load a font live. This means that the font is on the user's machine, and we don't have to use the internet to load the font. And it's a huge deal. So you want sans serif for readable text. I don't care if you have a serif, and I've mentioned the serifs are the little things that extend off the edge of the letter. So if we look at the serif font, you see like this big Caslon. Look at the edges of each character. They have a little tick on each one. Those are not readable. Those make it really tough to read the font. I know it sounds weird because we're used to reading it in a book. Books use serif fonts for their paragraphs, but the fact is that they really don't translate well digitally. Alright, this is a wireframe, which is the sketch or blueprint of a web page. Won't be required for this course, but it will be in future courses. And it basically communicates what goes where and exactly how the content will relate to each other. So things like logos, navigation, content footer. There's no aesthetics in this point, no choice of font. It just goes to this, shows structural layouts. And this is a lot of times how devs work. We can generate the layout off the wireframe. So when you get your stuff done, test at various screen resolutions, the heights and widths. Use the Chrome tools as I've been using in class. The actual design of the device tester here. Let me show you. Like this thing right here. If I go to my dev tools, make sure you test this like this, okay? I click on my little friend here, this guy, and I see how each device is going to lay out. So I can scroll this down a little bit. If I want to see it bigger, go to 100%. This is our buddy, though, and we want you to test before you submit, okay? Make sure everything's centered, consistent. I don't care if you have a fixed or percentage width, as long as you have media queries that cover mobile, things like that. And, whoops, excuse me. That is the end of our show for this evening in Meeting 12.